Welcome back to Night Whispers. Tonight, we aren't just looking at shadows. We're looking at what happens when those shadows decide they're tired of hiding. I've been a night supervisor at a 5-story distribution warehouse for 6 years. Most nights, it's just me, a thermos of black coffee, and the constant mechanical hum of the HVAC system. But last Tuesday, the atmosphere shifted. It started at 1:15 a.m. with a sound I'd never heard before, a metallic scraping coming from the ventilation ducts directly above my desk. I ignored it, figuring it was just a rat or the building settling. But then at 2 a.m., the motion sensors in loading bay 4 began tripping every 10 minutes. I checked the monitors, nothing, just empty concrete, yellow floor markings, and rows of plastic-wrapped pallets. By 3 a.m., the sensors weren't just tripping, they were staying active, as if something was standing directly in front of the lens, refusing to move. I grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight and headed down there. The walk from the office to Bay 4 usually takes 3 minutes, but tonight the warehouse felt miles long. Every row of racking I passed felt like a rib cage closing in on me. The air in Bay 4 was bone-chilling, a dry, unnatural frost that made my breath come out in thick clouds, even though the heaters were humming at full blast. I did my sweep. My flashlight beam cut through the dark like a blade, hitting rows of pallets stacked 10 feet high. Everything was still. To log my rounds, I had to take a time-stamped photo of the bay doors. I held my phone up, tapped the screen, and the flash went off. For a millisecond, the world turned white. In that flash, I didn't see an empty room. I saw a shape. Something tall, impossibly thin, and hunched over a crate of electronics just 10 feet away from me. It was coiled like a spring, its limbs too long for its body, joints bending at angles that would snap human bone. I froze. My heart was slamming against my ribs like a trapped bird. I swung my flashlight toward the crate, expecting to see a man, a thief, anything human. But there was nothing, just shadows and plastic. I stood there for 5 minutes, listening. The silence was absolute. I laughed it off, told myself it was eye floaters from the flash, and headed back to my office. But the walk back was different. I could hear something moving in the rafters 40 feet above me. Not a heavy footstep, but a light rhythmic clicking, like knitting needles hitting concrete. I locked my office door and sat down at my desk, my hands shaking as I pulled up the photo to upload it to the company server. I zoomed in on the corner of the frame, near the electronics crate. My blood turned to ice. Tucked behind the industrial wrap of a pallet, a face was peering out. It was long, translucent, and smooth. No eyes, just skin stretched tight over a skull. But the mouth was wide, unhinged, and packed with hundreds of tiny, needle-sharp teeth. And it wasn't just hiding. In the photo, it was in mid-stride, reaching out toward the back of my head. It had been inches away from me. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys and ran for the exit. But as I reached the heavy iron fire door, it slammed shut. I pulled the handle. It wouldn't budge. It felt like someone was holding it from the other side with the strength of a hydraulic press. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a notification from the security app. Movement detected in supervisor's office. I looked at the live feed on my phone. The camera was pointed at my empty chair. Then, slowly, the teeth creature crawled out from under my desk. It didn't look like an animal. It moved with a calculated, mocking grace. It picked up my coffee mug, sniffed it, and then looked directly into the camera lens. It began to mimic my own facial expressions from the photo I'd just taken. It twisted its features into a terrifying, tooth-filled version of my own face. It wasn't just a monster, it was a predator that learned by watching. Suddenly, the warehouse speakers, the ones used for emergency announcements, crackled to life. The sound was deafening in the empty facility. A voice came through. It was distorted, high-pitched, and wrong, but it was using my name. It sounded like my own voice played through a broken record. It said, "You forgot to sign out, Elias. We aren't finished with the audit." I sprinted toward the loading docks, my boots echoing like gunshots on the concrete. I didn't use my flashlight. I didn't want it to see where I was, but it didn't need light. Behind me, I heard the sound of 1,000 tiny teeth chattering together, a frantic, hungry vibration. It was moving through the rafters, skipping over the pallets like a spider, its long limbs clicking against the metal beams. I could see its shadow stretching across the floor every time I passed an emergency light. I reached Bay 4 just as the industrial doors began to slide open on their own. But they weren't opening to let me out. They were cycling, opening and slamming shut over and over, like a giant metal jaw. I timed it, waiting for the split second of clearance. I dove under the closing gap, scraping my chest on the pavement, feeling the wind of the heavy door missing my heels by an inch. I didn't stop running until I hit the main road. I'm in my car now, 3 miles away, parked under a bright street lamp. I just looked at my phone again. It's been sitting on the passenger seat, untouched. A new notification appeared. Face ID recognized. I haven't looked at the screen in 5 minutes, but the front-facing camera just took a burst of 20 photos in the dark interior of my car. And in every single one of them, those teeth are visible in the reflection of the rear-view mirror, inches away from my ear. It didn't stay at the warehouse. It's in the back seat.
A warehouse is one thing, but a hospital at night? That's where the line between life and death is at its thinnest, and sometimes that line just vanishes. I've been a night shift nurse at St. Jude's Clinic for nearly a decade. It's a private facility, mostly quiet, tucked away in the wooded outskirts of the city. Usually, the 3 a.m. shift is a cycle of paperwork, checking IV drips, and the soft, rhythmic chirping of heart monitors. But last Tuesday, the silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt heavy, like the building itself was holding its breath. It started at 2:10 a.m. at the central nursing station. I was updating charts when the monitor for room 12 began to flatline, a long, continuous, piercing tone that echoed through the empty hallway. My blood went cold, not because a patient was dying, but because room 12 has been decommissioned for 6 months. There was no bed, no equipment, and certainly no patient in that room. I checked the system. The terminal showed patient active, but the name field was just a string of corrupted, flickering symbols. I looked up at the security feed for the West Wing. The camera for room 12 was graining, the night vision mode struggling with the shadows. On the screen, the room wasn't empty. A man was sitting on the edge of where the bed should have been. He was dressed in a tattered, vintage hospital gown, his skin so pale it looked translucent under the infrared light. He wasn't moving, he was just staring directly into the camera lens. His eyes were wide, sunken, and completely black. I grabbed my tablet and headed toward the West Wing. The air in the hallway was freezing, smelling of industrial bleach and something sweet, like rotting lilies. Every time I passed a light fixture, it would buzz and dim, as if something was drawing the power out of the walls. I reached room 12. The heavy wooden door was slightly ajar. My heart was thumping in my throat. I pushed it open, expecting to find a squatter or a confused patient from the psych ward. The room was empty, totally, chillingly empty. No man, no bed, just bare floorboards and a layer of dust that hadn't been disturbed in months. But the heart monitor? It was there. A portable unit was sitting in the center of the floor, plugged into nothing, and it was flatlining. The red alarm light was pulsing in sync with my own heartbeat. I reached down to pull the plug, but as my hand touched the plastic casing, the flatline stopped. The screen changed. It didn't show a heart rate anymore. It showed a map of the hospital. A single red dot was moving rapidly down the hallway toward the nursing station, my station. I bolted out of the room, my rubber-soled shoes squeaking like screams on the linoleum. I reached the elevator bank and slammed the call button. The digital display above the door began to spin wildly, cycling through floors that didn't exist. Floor -1, floor -13, floor 0. The doors hissed open. The elevator was full of water, deep, stagnant, dark water that smelled like the sea. Floating on the surface was a single hospital wristband. I leaned in to look at the name. It was my own name, and the date of admission was tomorrow. Suddenly, the PA system throughout the hospital crackled to life. A voice, sounding like it was being pulled through a vacuum, began to whisper my private phone number over and over. I sprinted for the stairs, the emergency lights turning red as I passed them. I could hear footsteps behind me, not one person, but dozens, the sound of bare feet slapping against the tile, gaining on me with every second. I burst back into the main lobby, but the front glass doors were gone. In their place was a solid brick wall. I turned around and the man from room 12 was standing at the end of the hall. But he wasn't alone anymore. There were others, patients with stitched shut eyes, nurses with no faces, all of them twitching in that same jagged stop-motion rhythm. The man raised a finger to his lips. "Quiet," he whispered. The sound didn't come from his mouth. It came from inside my own head. "It's time for your checkup." I ducked into the records room and hid under a heavy steel desk. My phone started buzzing. I looked at the screen. It was a FaceTime call from room 12. I didn't want to answer, but the phone accepted the call on its own. The camera showed a POV of someone walking through the records room. Someone looking for me. They passed the filing cabinets. They passed the chairs. Then the camera tilted down and showed my own terrified face looking up from under the desk. I screamed and kicked the desk away, sprinting for the loading dock exit. I hit the crash bar and tumbled out into the parking lot, not stopping until I reached my car. I drove home in a trance, the sun finally coming up. I walked into my apartment, desperate for sleep. I sat on my bed and reached for my charger. That's when I saw it. Sitting on my nightstand was a small white plastic cup. Inside was a single bright red pill and a handwritten note in my own handwriting that said, "Take your medicine. We're coming to finish the surgery tonight." From the sterile halls of a hospital to the frozen, humming aisles of a data center, sometimes the machines see things we're unmeant to. I'm a senior data technician for a global financial firm in Chicago. My job is a ghost watch. I spend 12 hours a night walking between rows of glowing server racks, checking cooling levels, and ensuring that the heartbeat of the world's economy keeps thrumming. The server room is a temple of silence, kept at a constant, bone-chilling 18 degrees Celsius. It's so cold you can see your breath, and the fans create a white noise that usually drowns out your own thoughts. Last Thursday, at exactly 3:33 a.m., the hum stopped. Total, absolute, suffocating silence. I looked at my handheld terminal. The diagnostic screen was hemorrhaging errors. Every server in Rack 4 was accessing archive. My stomach dropped. Rack 4 was a decommissioned unit. It hadn't been plugged into the power grid or the fiber network for 3 years. It was a metal skeleton full of dead drives and dust. I walked to the back of the room, my boots echoing on the raised floor tiles like drum beats in a tomb. As I got closer to the dead rack, I heard something that made the hair on my arms stand up. It wasn't a mechanical fan or a hard drive spin. It was the sound of a keyboard. Rapid, aggressive typing. Click, 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 click. It was coming from inside the locked cage of Rack 4. I rounded the corner expecting to find a rogue coworker or a security breach. There was no one, but the monitor attached to the side of the dead rack was alive. It was glowing a sickly electric blue. A single line of text was scrolling across the screen at light speed. "Thank you for letting me in." Over and over. "Thank you for letting me in." I reached for the manual power kill switch, but I caught my reflection in the polished glass of the server rack door. I froze.
The man in the glass wasn't just a reflection. He was wearing my exact uniform. He was holding my exact badge, but he wasn't mirroring my movements. While I was standing perfectly still, the man in the glass was leaning forward, his face pressed against the interior of the server rack, staring at me with a grin that was too wide for a human face. He raised his hand and tapped on the glass from the inside. 3 slow, heavy knocks. Thud, thud, thud. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. A notification from the building's security system. Employee ID number 8842 has exited the building. I looked at my own badge. That was my ID number. According to the system, I was already outside. I looked back at the glass, and the man was gone. But the blue screen on the server rack had changed. It was now a live feed of my own home security camera. It showed my living room. My wife was asleep on the couch with the TV on, and standing in the doorway, watching her, was the man from the reflection. He looked exactly like me. He turned toward the camera, winked, and then the feed cut to static. I sprinted for the exit, slamming my badge against the scanner. Access denied. The voice of the automated security system came through the ceiling speakers. It wasn't the usual robotic woman. It was my own voice, recorded, edited, mocking. We don't recognize this user. Intruder detected in Sector 7. The server room lights turned a violent flashing red. The cooling fans suddenly kicked into overdrive, spinning so fast they began to scream. The temperature started dropping, 10 degrees, 0 degrees, -20. The air was turning into ice in my lungs. I looked at the floor tiles. They were beginning to unlock themselves, flipping over one by one, leading directly back toward Rack 4. I grabbed a heavy fire extinguisher and smashed the glass of the emergency exit. I tumbled into the stairwell and didn't stop running until I burst out of the lobby and into the street. I didn't care about my car. I didn't care about my job. I ran 5 blocks to a gas station and called my wife. She picked up on the 3rd ring. Her voice sounded groggy, confused. "Hey, honey, why are you calling? You literally just walked into the bedroom. I can hear you brushing your teeth right now." The blood drained from my face. I looked down at my badge, the one the scanner had rejected. The photo of my face was gone. In its place was a smooth, blank white space. And the name was gone too. It had been replaced with a string of code, archive complete. I'm standing under a streetlight now, looking at my own house from across the street. All the lights are off, except for the bedroom window. I can see a silhouette standing there, looking down at me. It's waving, and in its hand, it's holding my house keys.